Here we're going to take a look at the design of an asynchronous lesson, and a couple of things to point out here. First thing that we're going to point out is that I'm looking at this example in Microsoft Forms. What we're really going to focus on here is not the tool, but the concept under which this lesson was put together. So if you're in Microsoft School and you're using Forms, great. If you're a Google School, there's tools there that you can use. Perhaps your school maybe has Nearpod or Pear Deck or other tools that we haven't even mentioned here that would accomplish the same thing. So one thing I want you to focus on is that we're going to just talk about the design of an asynchronous lesson. It's not necessarily about the tool. So we're looking at this lesson from the student perspective, and this is a lesson called the 4 Seasons. And so in this lesson, notice that we gave the students a little bit of information about what they're going to be learning about. We talked about how the lesson is structured, the time it should take to complete the lesson, what to expect from the lesson, and what they should be able to do with the lesson when they're done. These are all really important things for a student to know and for them to want to engage with this content. They want to know, how is this going to benefit me in the end? So as we look at this lesson, this first part of the lesson gives them that background. And as we go through this lesson, the lesson title is 4 Seasons. And this is a lesson in your classroom. Let's pretend this was going to be somewhere between a 20 to 30 minute presentation in your classroom. We're going to break this up into 4 parts. So we're going to talk about 4 seasons, and we're saying that each part should take the students no more than 10 minutes to complete. A couple of reasons why that's really important. One, we want students to know what to expect, and we'll talk about some other things we could build into our project to let students know where they're at in that. But also you kind of want to give them a gauge to maybe when it's taking them too much time. So either maybe where they're spending a little bit too much time on something, and maybe they need to go back and review the content and try again if they're working on a question, or maybe they've gotten distracted with other things. And so they're saying that the lesson's taking them a lot longer, and it's really taking them longer because they're distracted with other things while they're trying to do their work. All right, so let's take a look at what this lesson looks like. So here's part 1 of the lesson, and part 1 has this little description. Part 1 is all about winter. So maybe this is a little section of our lesson. Winter is one of the 4 things that we're going to learn about. Give the students some direction for this section. That they will, when they're going to use this, they're going to use this to complete a certain part, maybe of a project or maybe an assignment they have. We give that reminder for them to take notes while they're watching. And then they would go in here and watch this video. Now, when we watch this video, notice that this video is a really short little bit of content. This is a 4-minute video. When you're designing asynchronous content, kids are going to drift, and they're going to drift fast. I know even in a classroom, sometimes it can feel like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get through 20 minutes? That just doesn't seem like enough time. Well, in the asynchronous environment, students are going to be even more distracted. So little bite-sized chunks of content, a little 4-minute video, 5 minutes when you're composing your little chunks, think in the 5 to 10 minute range, and really we want to be on the 5 side of that. So just a little chunk of content for the students to watch. This was designed using Microsoft Forms, using sections, and we'll take a look at the design side in a minute. But notice that the students will start by watching this video, and then they'll click next to get to the next part. And I've also noticed down here we've got this little progress bar. And so this is giving us students of where they are in the lesson. What have I done, and how much do I still have left to complete? So I click next, and we just watched that 5-minute video. Students have engaged by not only watching the content, but hopefully writing something down in their notebook, because we want students to get into the habit of engaging physically with the material, even though it's presented in a virtual format. They could be handwriting their notes. That's the suggested piece. Get out a notebook and a pencil and physically write. So there's that kinesthetic process along with writing. But students could certainly type their notes as well if that's what they want to do. So giving students something to do, you've just presented them with a little bit of content. Same thing in the classroom. You've talked with your students for a few minutes, presented some examples, shown them some things. Now you want to give them a chance to practice with what they've learned. So in this content, our next section is a little review and a couple of different ideas for the review section. One would be to get feedback from the students. So here's a little piece of the lesson. How are you feeling about the All About Winter video? What are you feeling? How do you still have questions? So here we give kind of a way for students just to give you some feedback about what they're feeling in the class. This is data that you could go and look at after the fact. Students are going to be completing this lesson at their own pace. But as you start to look at the responses from students, you might notice trends and themes on a particular topic, and that might give you an idea of something you need to spend more time on in class, maybe make some supplemental resources about in class, or just things to be prepared for when students get to that point of a project in a class. Something they might need some extra help with. So this is just feedback. This is how you feeling type of feedback. And then down here, this is a question that they could answer based on the lesson. So, here's this question, what season is this? And here's a little multiple choice question that the students get to answer. Notice in both of these that I forced students to complete these questions. This little red star in this software means that you have to answer this question. So before I can go on, I got to tell you that I got it. And this is springtime right here. All right, so I'm going to go to the next to click the next button. And now I come to a little bit of feedback. The question that we asked students was almost just a little self-check. It wasn't necessarily you got it right, you got it wrong. It's kind of more of it's that formative assessment piece, right? And even though you're not there doing the formative assessment with your students, you're collecting the data, and we'll take a look at the form side of how you're collecting that information, but it's also formative for your students. This is a place where really that data, it's for you as the class, but it's for them as the learner. One of the things in remote learning, they're going to start taking more ownership of their own learning. Where do I need to spend extra time? So here's that picture again, and we give the answer to the question. This is winter. And we give that student the call to action. What should they do? If they got this question wrong, what should you do? Get in touch with me as your teacher. And how do you want them to get in touch with me? Email me or come to office hours. Invite the students to come to you with their questions. So at this point in the lesson, we said that we were going to have, there's 4 seasons, so this was just part 1. So at this point, then the students would proceed into part 2, part 3, and part 4, where they would learn about spring, summer, and fall. All right, so let's pretend we're at the point where they've learned about that last season. Let's say the last thing they learned about is fall, and we get to the end, and now they have a direction of where to go. So in this particular example, they're going to go complete this project. Maybe this might even just be a screen of a recap of what they learned in the lesson, or some other assignment that they're going to complete. So as you're designing your asynchronous content, a few things to keep in mind that we talked about: bite-sized chunks of content, getting the students to engage with the content, an invitation of what to do next, either when they have a question or when they are finished with the lesson. So we're looking at the student experience. This is the final design. Let's go back and take a look at the design side. Few things to point out in here. Again, I'm using this particular tool of Microsoft Forms, but tools I mentioned, Microsoft Forms, Google Forms, Pear Deck, Nearpod, a lot of these have very similar flows to them. Other tools maybe that you're using that you're familiar with. The idea, what I did here was I used a lot of sections and broke the content into bits. It also allowed students to only see a little bit of content at a time. They didn't see all of this at once, which is just a lot of scrolling and is very overwhelming. We want something that looks visually inviting to the students, what draws them in, what makes them think, I can do this. So taking time to write out phrases in the way students read. We tend to read in bullet points. We don't tend to read big, long blocks of text. So take those paragraphs, break them up into bullet points, kind of give them that opportunity to skim read, because that is generally how we read information on a screen, how we take in information. And as far as designing the questions, look for opportunities to have all different kinds of questions that students can answer. Keep in mind that this is a form, and at the end of this, we'll take a look at it again. The students are going to submit this to you as the teacher, so you're going to have a record of the assignment that they've completed, which is really great for you to know who's engaging in the class and doing their work. So you can ask all kinds of different kinds of questions. In this particular case, I chose to design this as a drop-down multiple choice question, but in your software that you're using, there may be all kinds of different questions. For example, if we look here, but really we want to stick to things that are going to be really simple for the students to answer. Multiple choice questions, short answer questions are really common. In this particular software, there really isn't an option for, say, matching or drag and drop or things like that. There are softwares out there that do those really fancy types of questions, which are great. If you have that, use it. Mix up your question types. Have them, have them look at a picture, have them, work through something, all kinds of different things that you can do here, but keep this simple, and definitely give them feedback, especially in an environment they don't always want to wait on your feedback. You grading things, be strategic about the things you're going to grade in the class, the things that they're going to wait for your feedback on. It's okay to give them some immediate feedback, let them know how they're progressing, and then let them know what to do if they're having questions. So in this particular form here, there's this responses. So when they get to this last question, we'll take a look at it again, they would submit this. And then in here, when students submit, there would be a list of all the responses that have come through. In this particular tool, when you go into the spreadsheet, you would see individual student responses. So that gives you an idea of who's responded and what answers they had. So if you really wanted to dive in with a particular student about what they did or didn't understand, you could do that. Certainly as the class, maybe look at the data altogether in the aggregate, but for individual students, if a student comes to you, say for tutoring or one-on-one help, you can always go into a specific lesson and say, okay, here's some of the responses that you had, maybe work with them on some specific questions they might have. That might be something for the student who's maybe a little more reluctant to engage or feeling a little bit shy about how to engage. So as you're working on designing your asynchronous content, whatever tools you have available to you, keep in mind these little tips that'll help keep students engaged with the content in your class.